This week on Inside Marketing, I'll be talking to one of Ireland's most respected and revered marketers, Colin Gordon. He thinks marketing's in real trouble as an industry, and he's better qualified than most on the matter. So, stay tuned as we ask, how do we get here? And more importantly, is there a way out? On this week's Inside Marketing.
The Inside Marketing Podcast, brought to you by Dentsu and Irish Times Media Solutions.
Hello and welcome. Today we're talking about marketing and particularly about how marketing has lost its way. And I'm delighted to be joined by Colin Gordon, who's founder of Engage Consulting and has just recently written a book called Marketing is in Trouble. Colin, thanks for joining me. How are you?
I'm very well, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Are you safe? Are you getting on well? I know we're chatting just about how Baltic it is today.
No, safe and well. The family are safe and well, which is the main priority at the moment. And I have my own sort of routine and just waiting for this all to pass.
And are you enjoying your leisure time at the moment? Well, I wouldn't call it leisure time, but...
I'm not allowed to use the word retired. That was forbidden very early on.
I didn't say that. I did not say retired. Well,
I'm enjoying it. I'm doing things I want to do at the pace I want to do them at for people I wanted to work with. So you couldn't ask for any more than that.
That sounds good to me. Sounds like me all day, every day. That's what I'm living the dream. Well, listen, thanks for coming on. And I've said this on a couple of podcasts before. It's brilliant to have different perspectives on this podcast because I think too often the danger is it can be an echo chamber. So we have a lot of commentary from, say, the media agency or the publisher side. And it's rare that I kind of get someone from the client side on for whatever reason. I'm hoping to change that this year. But so it is brilliant to have you on because you've had such a distinguished career in marketing from the client side. So before we get into the book that I mentioned, give me your 60-second CV for anyone who's listening and says, I don't know who this Colin Gordon fella is. Just give me the 60-second CV.
So 60 seconds. So 30-something years, 35, 36 years in 60 seconds. I did a business degree in Trinity. I did a master's in marketing in UCD. Ended up working with UCD afterwards and then went on to worked in their Centre for Marketing Studies with Tony Cunningham, who was a superb character. Went on into lucky enough to go on into many well-recognized companies, Johnson & Johnson, John Player and Sons, which is Imperial Tobacco, I guess. And then I went into what was the C&C Group, or what is the C&C Group, slightly different now than it was then. I went in as marketing director into their business in Clonmel, which was showerings, effectively Bulmers. Lots of other brands. We ended up buying Ballygown. We had Britvic, we had Sidona, we had Ritz, and loads. And we brought Miller into Ireland. We brought Coors into Ireland. Mm-hmm. And lots of other bits and pieces. Then I went on to the other parts. I moved from alcohol to soft drinks, and I ran the soft drinks business for C&C in different guises for about 10 years. And then moved into Glanbia. Glanbia it's the biggest consumer foods company in the country. It does about 2 million units per day to the Irish households and restaurants and pubs and all the rest, whether it be milk or cream or cheese or yogurt or soups or anything else. So I've worked with a lot of very good brands, great people. I've also worked with, I was on the board in Board Bia for a period of time. I chaired the food and drink industry groupie within IBEC for a number of years as well. So I got to see not just what I was doing within my own paid work, but also what other people were doing. And that gave me a kind of a wider perspective, I guess, in the whole FMCG area.
Yeah, so you definitely know your stuff anyway. You've had, as I say, an amazing career, some amazing brands, and been responsible for some amazing, not just brands, but turnarounds and brands, which we can get into later on. But as I mentioned at the start, you have written a book late last year. It was out and it's entitled Marketing is in Trouble. And first of all, it's a brilliant read. So congratulations. It's a great read. I'd urge anyone who's listened to this. And even if you're not directly involved in marketing, if you're even interested in marketing, it's actually just a great read. So I really enjoyed it, which is a great compliment to you. It's really well written. So it's full of insight. So I recommend, first of all, check it out. You also wrote, I was going to say, like, to give people a taste of the book. It's not fair to say that because it's only 1,200 words. An article in today's Irish Times, which again, I'd urge people to check out because it makes a very, very shortened kind of synopsis of some of the thoughts in the book. So I'm going to kick off there. And in the article, you mentioned something which I thought was quite interesting. You said that you see it's ironic in the way you see that marketing, how marketing has developed, what it used to mean in companies and what it means now. What do you mean by that? What was the point about the irony you see in it?
Yeah, well, I guess there's a number of different levels of irony. One would be how much work had been going on not that long ago historically in the 30s and 50s in particular, somewhat in the 40s. about how important and how central marketing was to be in an organization's strategy, in their setup, and their business modeling. And that was all very positive. And at the same time, marketing as an idea was becoming effectively pervasive. So a couple of numbers, there's over 10.5 million people who have marketing on LinkedIn as part of their profile. That's a big bunch of people. That's twice the Irish population.
I need to get my listenership up if the numbers that big. It's not going well.
There are 100,000 books before mine. It might be 100,001 now. 100,000 books on Amazon.co.uk with marketing in their title. There's over 500 courses at level 7 or above with marketing in their course title in Ireland alone. So marketing, and then you go into, marketing is part of. We talk about brands, we talk about ads we talk about campaigns. It appears in films, it appears on plays, Death of a Salesman. So you end up thinking that marketing, its time has arrived. It has all this great thinking back as far as Procter & Gamble in 1931, General Electric in 1952, David Packard in 1960, all really making sure that marketing was at the core of business. And at the same time as all of that, the research I did for the book and my own sense of it for quite some time, which is why I wrote the book, would seem to suggest that people don't really know what marketing is. And by the way, people don't really know what marketing is. They have, in some books, some authoritative books would say would state 170 or more definitions of what marketing is. And part of what I was trying to do in the book is understand that kind of conflict between, on the one hand, everyone assuming they knew what it was and it was huge and very successful, and everyone was doing their thing. On the other hand, the people who actually were doing it weren't quite sure what it was and what they're meant to be doing.
Yeah, and there's a lot in that. So we will get into a lot of the topics on it. So as I say, you go deep on a lot of these things. And again, which is good, which I was hoping for. There's a lot of books that are kind of, doom and gloom and talking about negatives in it. But I think what's quite good about your book was that there's some suggestions. Some are relatively easy, some are difficult. But we'll get in now to some of the themes around this. And one of the key themes that in the book is that, and it's something I know myself and people would probably generally agree with, that marketing has kind of lost its seat at the top table, if you will. And you gave an example of how, it being, as you talked about before, being having an impact on the wider industry. But one of the examples in the book you talked about is how GE, a company like GE you just mentioned there, how they used to think about marketing and how they think about it now. So I think undoubtedly what's happened is business has changed and it's gone short term. That's just the way it is. And the company's main purpose is maximizing shareholder value. So that's a bit of a problem in an industry that's obsessed with short-term marketing. By definition, and you'll know this better than anybody, tends to pay off quite a lot of its return in the longer term, certainly in the medium to longer term. So that's a problem. We've lost our seat at the top table and the world has gone short-term, and that really doesn't suit us. So this debate, I want to just talk to you about this short-term versus long-term. It never goes away. We've done, I think it's come up in 3 or 4 podcasts. But yet, when you look at the work and the research that's available, Binet and Field and all that, we seem to have, I don't know why this argument is still going on about short-term, long-term. Why is that? Why is business so focused on short-term and can't see past any kind of quarterly analysis? And why has that meant that marketing is disintermediated in that sense? That's a long question, but...
No. Well, and there's a lot in the question. My offer in the answers is my offer. Other people might have different views, but I'm trying to put it on the basis of the research I did, not just the qual research I did with behaviour and attitudes for the book, but also my own experience and a fair amount of desk research and library research to understand what's going on. So let me just think about it in one way. If you don't know what you are, very hard to actually be really taken seriously. If you're sitting at the top table, metaphorically, in a business, and someone goes, okay, what do you do? I'm not quite sure. Okay, why are you here? That's the next question. How much do you cost?
Yeah.
So what you're doing, it's very easy to become marginalized. Then you have all the other questions that flow out of that, which is if you don't know what you're doing, how do you measure if you're getting there at all or not? How can you compare different measurements against other measurements and so on? But fundamentally, if you can't define what you are, then what are you doing at the top table in the first place? Then you dial back to, at the same time as that was going on and more ideas were coming out, most of the definitions around marketing really revolved around the digital marketing. Was direct mail marketing. There's consumer marketing versus business-to-business marketing. All these kind of things came out, but they were almost trying to get as many angels onto the top of the head of the pin as possible, but no one actually knew where the pin was, what the pin was trying to do. I mean, digital marketing is not digital marketing. Digital marketing is a platform for marketing. Yeah. It's not a separate thing. My key issue, I think, is that at the same time as all of that kind of misunderstanding and misrepresentation was going on, which then causes you to say, well, what is marketing? But I'll come back to that in a moment. At the same time as that, Jack Welch, who was the head in every possible way, executive chairman, chief executive, president, whatever you want to call it, of General Electric, and he was, this guy was a superstar in business terms, huge increase in the value of their business. He brought out in 1981 a speech which was all along growing fast in a slow growth economy. And the American business system became preoccupied with the fact that they'd lost their league position against the Japanese. And they couldn't really get around that. So they decided the best thing to do was to bulk up their market value. And bulking up their market value developed into a whole range of different things, of mergers and acquisitions, cost cutting, selling stuff off, buying stuff in as quickly as possible, and getting the results as quickly as possible so that you could meet the quarter by quarter time requirements of the stock exchange in America. Now, you could say most businesses are not PLCs, they're not listed on the stock exchange, and they're not. But this thinking permeated through business, and it permeated into business colleges. It permeated into executive education programs, and all of a sudden, everything became measurable. It became Excel. Here's a word: Excel spreadsheetable.
Right.
It became very focused on, will that deliver value now?
Yeah.
Didn't. There was a problem, and so the two things, you couldn't say what you were doing at the same time as people saying, "I need it now."
Yeah.
Because of this new pervasive thought from a rock star in the business world. Were coming together at the same time. And that was an unfortunate combination or confluence of timings and events.
Yeah, and you can see why it happened. And maybe marketing just... We can touch on this as we get going. Maybe like there is still a question, has marketing done enough to prove its value and its worth? But as you say, it's hard if marketing isn't clear as an industry and what it does, even what its definition is, that's going to be quite tricky. Another reason which you point out is the increasingly short tenure of CMOs. And I'd say the marketing teams, the clients we work with, in a lot of cases, the marketing people are changing. And I do understand that they have to churn people around to keep them fresh. So not all of them leave the business, but they move around within the business quite a lot. They move on to different brands. And actually, when you think about that, there's a knock-on effect, a flaw with that mentality, because it doesn't encourage anyone to think in the long term. So like if I was a brand manager and I was being bonused on my performance this year, and I'm going to have to hit this year by Q3 my budgets are being pulled. So it's not really in my interest to start doing something big now that will be paid back in 3 years' time, because I'm probably not going to be there in 3 years' time. My success is probably going to get the benefit of that. I probably won't be in that company. I certainly won't be in that role. So that's a real problem. And I guess when the question is, this sounds like we're in a kind of vicious circle, and it's a downward vicious circle, downward spiral. So how can the industry think long term if personnel change so frequently?
Well, I think the personnel change so quickly because they don't actually know what they're meant to be doing. In a sense, this spoiler alert, I'll go to the end in order to answer this. My view of what marketing is much more than the part of the business that is seen by the public, by your competitors, by your trade. And that applies to whether it's business to business or business to consumer, whether it's a service or a product. Marketing is much more than that. My definition of marketing is making selling easier. And making selling easier may involve advertising. It may involve ad agencies. It may involve promotions, PR, sponsorship. It may involve product redesign, innovation. Not necessarily. If you dial back a little bit further, what's the purpose of business? Business is all about identifying or creating a customer and finding a way to serve them, him, she, or them, repeatedly. Unless you're selling atomic nuclear plants, you hope to sell something more than once. You might sell a second one to another country because of what the first company is.
Or after sales, exactly, even after sales, or,
Yeah, so business is about identifying and creating, getting and retaining, if you want to call it, making and holding a customer. That's what business is. Everything else is redundant. You don't need a finance department. You don't need a production department. You don't need a distribution department. They all can be farmed out. You cannot farm out how you're going to hold on to the relationship with the customer. That is up. So Nike don't have a production department. Most Coke is not produced by Coke. It's produced by their affiliates and by their bottling franchise companies, partners. So everything can be farmed out. You can farm out distribution, you can farm out HR. You cannot farm out the essence of a business, which is finding a way to nurture the relationship with a customer and develop that over time and develop the business because of that. And if, therefore, the visible part of marketing, and what I've gone on to talk about apart from the book, is this idea of icebergs. So 4/5 of an iceberg is below water, 1/5 above water, or thereabouts. The 1/5 is what everyone focuses on in marketing. It's the ad award. It's the quick fire things that people can identify. And it's very easy for a marketing person to be drawn into those rather than the hard slog of, is the call center good? Is the website right? Is the distribution team up to scratch?
Mm-hmm.
Does the sales guy actually know what he's selling, he or she is selling?
Mm-hmm.
Do the production department actually produce something which I really, really want rather than what they actually can do or choose to do? And the finance guys are only there to keep score. That's what their job is: keep score and keep everyone else out of jail. If you lose sight of the customer as the core part of the business reason to exist, then you're losing sight as to what is your long term or short term. In a really, really strong way, the brand manager, marketing manager, assuming you actually need a department, they are not as important as the CEO who actually says, I don't care who's sitting at the table, this is what we're doing for the customer over the next 10, 15, whatever years. I'm picking those numbers.
Yeah.
It could be 5 years. Then everything flows out of that. And an awful lot of marketing's worth to a company are things that are not invisible. They are the 4/5 below the waterline.
Yeah.
It is organizing the whole of the company and all of its resources to best serve the customer and to make it easier for them to shop your product.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that, and I think you gave your definition of marketing. I think a lot of people, when and probably myself included, when we think about marketing, we tend to think of paid promotion. We go there first, like the above the line paid promotional aspects of a campaign, and I agree with you that thinking about it in a broader, not from my point of view, from the client's point of view, whoever owns that business. Like obviously we do the marketing bit for lots of different clients, but people having a culture of marketing within a business, I totally agree with that. Another thing which is difficult, about this kind of inability to think long term, and another thing which hinders that, and you point to this in the book because you've done research on it, is the constant churning of agency partners. So I was completely shocked to read that on the research you did, that the level of change with agency partners, despite the level of satisfaction, exists amongst agency clients. So nearly, in your book, it says nearly all clients are relatively happy with their agency partners, yet they change every 2 to 3 years. So again, it sounds obvious, and maybe I would say this, but doesn't it make it really difficult for anybody to think long term if you don't value a relationship? I think the way you put it in the book is marketing treats partners poorly, is the way you put it in your book.
Politely, yeah.
Yeah.
I say politely, but they treat them poorly.
Yeah. So why does that happen?
It's a dysfunctional relationship at best. I mean, at best, it's a dysfunction. There are very few, and we kind of know them. If you kind of put a blank piece of paper and a pen, you could write down a number of client agency partnerships that have lasted over many years. But it wouldn't be, page 10, page 12, page 20. You'd get a few down in Ireland. You get a few down in different countries that we'd know about, but it isn't extensive. I think the real issue is, and this is the kind of controversial thing. Marketing people, if they have lost the ability to get into the business, into that 4/5 piece, and really make themselves invaluable as some form of collaboration unit, a collaboration principle within a business to bring the various bits together to make selling easier, then they're automatically going to go to that 1/5 piece. And a really good way of keeping yourself busy is when you come in, fire the agency, go for a repitch. That takes, you can sit down at any table, any canteen, any drinks on a Friday night and go, pitch has taken ages, for God's sake. And I've got pitch doctors in, I've got experts running around all over the place. I mean, there is the kind of the very facetious thing of the not the 4 Ps of marketing, but the 3 Rs: redesign, relaunch, resign.
Right.
And so I've said it before in the Irish Times. Marketing people, marketeurs, have become very busy at being busy.
Yeah.
And sometimes I revert back to the Ronald Reagan quote, which is, don't just do something, stand there. Don't be busy. Look at the business, understand all the different touch points and all the different ways a consumer's journey can be made a mess of. Or if it's a joy, how can you accelerate? How can you enhance the joy and mitigate the mess? And that's what marketing is to me. Marketing is not about making an ad. Of course, I've had fantastic fun making ads. Some of the ads have changed what we've done in the business. Not necessarily always just in front of the consumer, but they've given a huge kind of flag waving exercise internally in the company. I've no doubt about the value of advertising at all.
Yeah.
But it's the only part of marketing. And so the marketing people should know a profit and loss statement really, really well. They should know when to stop a production line and say, that's not what I want. They should say the distribution guys are actually inept. They're not good enough. The order fulfill rate is wrong. They should have the authority in the business to be able to say that and people to go, do you know what, you're right.
Yeah.
Therefore, short-term measures don't matter in that regard. It's a much longer-term way of doing business. And the short-term way a marketing person can shine is win an award, repitch the business, redesign the pack, do a promotion.
Get a new agency for cheaper, get more value out of the agency. It's a great point, because I only know the agency background. But like when I think of, say, your career in the alcohol industry, and it wasn't just new ads. New ads are only going to do so much for you. So to rethink what you did for what was done for Bulmers, a new ad wasn't going to get that brand out of trouble. It had to change your best-selling SKU. You had to completely, change your target audience. You had to change distribution. You had to get so an ad's not going to solve that problem. And I think all those things you talked about, I know we'll talk about it later on, touch points, and any potential interaction that a consumer has with the brand, a touch point, that's creating quote unquote marketing.
Yeah.
And there is, back to that point, there's a quote in the book which I love, which you mentioned earlier on, which is David Packard's. He's saying marketing is too important to be left to the marketing department. And yet, increasingly, we've touched on it a little bit, but increasingly we have seen marketing become siloed, I think is the best way of putting it. So, but just on that point there that you talked about, the ad is one part of it, and the end of aisle and Tesco's another part of it, or whatever the case may be, but it's much, much bigger than that. And I'm quoting a lot of things just because there's a lot of nice ways of putting things in the book. I mean, you say, just to illustrate that point, you say that some of the best marketing is done by delivery drivers, and that's something that I talked about this last year when I was talking to a colleague, and I was going, it was in the airport, and actually the McDonald's, all the staff are wearing t-shirts just saying, my boss is a clown. And it kind of that was brilliant marketing to me, because it brought everything that the brand's about, which is a smile in your day, a little bit of fun. And it just lightened them. It just put me in because it was quite stressful that time when I was in the airport, and this put me in a good mood. So you're totally right about that. But I think when I got the book, I was saying, wow, is Colin saying that we don't need marketing departments? And you're not saying that, but what you're saying is marketing shouldn't be siloed to the marketing department. So you would agree that large organizations, they do need a dedicated function, be it a person or a department or agency partners that in marketing. So, but how do you ensure that they're not siloed? Because it's very easy to say, we do it in our business, we don't want any silos. Easy to say, difficult to do. How have you gone about doing that in your businesses?
I'll give you one trick. One thing we did, and I actually found it really, really good. We developed what we called OBN, which is one big number. We were doing 100 of something. And I remember saying to the guys, what do you think would be success? What would actually change the nature of that brand and the orientation of the business? And the answer was, I don't know, 120, 130. And I went, what would 150 do? And they said, couldn't be done. And I said, why? And I said, because we need more innovation, because we'd want to change the pack format, because the distribution guys aren't incentivized that way, because the sales guys don't understand it. All of the whys became the unifying, holistic thing as to why we should do it. And marketing wasn't siloed anymore. Mm-hmm. Everyone in the business bought into, because I stood up in front of everyone and said, this is why we're going to do it. Yeah. And the first report I want to see on a Monday morning is that number, not all the other numbers, that number. Yeah. And why, and with people, not without, not kind of in massive detail with loads of words on the document, tell me why we didn't get it or why we did get it and what we actually should do next week, what's different we should do. And we used the one big number on how we're going against that target and how we had done against the previous 12-week running average and the 12-week running average of the previous year. So we were able to work out what was actually working, what wasn't working. And that's very easy to do in a business generally. You could do that for product or for service. You can do it for call center success rates. Yeah. Find something that unifies and make it part of the company's mission. And it shouldn't be something which is, for this month or for this year. It's something which you can say, we're going to get to 150 over 4 years. Yeah, I'm just that number out. That was our it was a 150% increase over 3 years. What we looked for, we got it in 2. And why? Because we put everything around answering the reasons why, and none of the reasons. Sorry, there was one reason, which was we needed to tweak the advertising. It was very small. It was a really small part of it. The main things were internal to the business, and people understood what marketing was trying to do. So it became unifying. It became a common purpose. That is easier to do, I accept, if it's coming from the top. It doesn't have to come from a brand manager. But even a brand manager can actually decide, this is my pack, this is my product, this is my promotion. I'm going to try and find what the one big number idea would be in relation to that small thing and make it work around the business.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think that idea of business are complicated, but that idea that I know my contribution to that greater whole number, whatever that means to me, I think that can be quite difficult sometimes but I think actually if you don't
have... You know the old quote, Dave, you know the old quote of Kennedy walking through
NASA,
an aircraft hangar. And what are you doing? He said to the guy with the sweeping brush, he said, I'm helping put the man on the moon.
Yeah, that sense of purpose and everybody knowing that they have their place in it. It's brilliant. It is amazing. And I think it is great to have it. It is harder to do than not do it and to just pick kind of, and I think what you talked about a lot in the book is in absence of those things, that those meaningful numbers or contributions, well, you can find a million things to measure. Like, and I don't know, like you get right into tiny little media partnership campaigns that delivered X amount of likes, clicks, engagement, whatever, views, smiley faces, whatever you want to call it. And we all think it's great. And yet it's it's hard to measure the impact of some of those little small things on a greater good. But I think if you start looking for ways to how you can contribute to that bigger number, at least it's a starting point. You know where the North Star is. So yeah, I totally agree with all that. On the issue of art or science, because I know it's something you touch on, and these things are related somewhat, that they kind of intertwine as you go through the book. But there is a thing, Rory Sutherland makes the point that this today, and this is what I'm loving your answer. I want to hear your answer on this. I'm really interested because he makes a point that today the CEOs of a business are more likely to be finance background people. That's where they come from. They're the people who've won on the land grab. Whereas if you go back 20 years ago, the CMO was more likely to have done a stint in the marketing department. He or she knew marketing. They got it. They understood how marketing worked. And by definition, then they didn't need to be convinced of marketing's contribution to business. Now, when you got the finance guys in control, they look short term and they look at marketing as a cost as opposed to an investment that is essential to drive growth. And the industry is not brilliant at proving its short term value. So you are an example of somebody who's gone from within that career. You've gone from senior leadership roles within marketing, you've stepped outside of the marketing world to be a leader, MD and CEO of pretty big companies. So, given you've done both, why do you think marketing can't defend itself? Essentially, why we've fell this short-termism, and is it a case, as we discussed about a second ago, that marketing, quote unquote, isn't measuring the right things? Because you've seen both sides of it. You've been the marketing person working with a CEO who may or may not have a marketing background, and then you were the CEO with the marketing background.
Yeah, so it's not that important whether the CEO has a recognized qualification in marketing or not, or has actually worked in marketing, but they must be a marketer. That sounds a little bit subtle and maybe a little bit of a philosophical point. They need to be the best salesman. They need to be a really, really good visionary about where they want to bring the company. They need to be able to understand the breadth of the company rather than just the P&L. They need to understand people, both customers, trade, and employees, and bring all of that together to be a marketer of the business, a marketer of the vision, as much as of the product or the service. And too often, and I do get this, by the way, as CEO, you get dragged into everything. But the ability to be able to understand why is something happening, the ability to be able to say no, we won't do something, and be able to give your colleagues the confidence to walk away from the meeting and go, yeah, no was the right answer, because it's put in a context, it's put against the vision, it's put against the wide knowledge that the person should have. That's actually what's going to set out a CEO with a strong business ethic, rather than a CEO who happens to be a good financier. Listen, anyone in business can get bothered with the day-to-day, and the real issue is you have to stand back and work out, what are we actually trying to do here? It is about business. It's not about developing fancy financial modeling. It's about doing business. If you haven't got business, you've got no reason for finance.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess, look, the argument, look, every business had them, we have them internally, and it's much quicker to cut a cost than to try and stimulate growth, because the cost cutting effectively gets written into your balance sheet the day you decide to do it, and you can start to plan for that, and you can show, hey, we've made. But look, the agency people like me will always think, we want to hit our number. Why don't we, do something else, win more business, sell more, whatever? And the finance person will always think, why don't we just cut costs to readjust? But you readjust downwards. I'd rather readjust upwards. I know that's kind of maybe.
But there are some things that take place, Dave, which are I find baffling. So you go on to any of, particularly the American websites, so you go onto your iPhone and you or you go onto some of the TV stations, and they'll give you the movement in the the Dow Jones or the FTSE or the Hang Seng in real time.
Yeah.
And they'll have news alerts coming in. We're 15 minutes from closure on, if you think of Bloomberg and the rest. We're 15 minutes from closure. That's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense that people actually can look at minor changes unless you're actually a day trader or your business is about margins. Businesses don't behave on minute changes minute by minute. I think it's really, really, really poor that businesses report on a quarterly basis. Because if you're selling something in FMCG or if you're selling something like housing stock, there are seasons, there are outside pressures. This constant strive for quarter on quarter or half year on half year continuous growth is unrealistic. There's a lot of books in philosophy that I touch on, but didn't actually go into detail on the book, which is have we bought everything we want? And in many cases, by the way, we have. Certainly, if you go by the number of ding-dongs on our door here with couriers leaving stuff in for the kids and ourselves, do we want that? Well, do you know what? Want and need are becoming a bit messed up. But there is a sense of what is this that we have. Businesses have to have financial growth every quarter or every half year. There is a movement a little bit away from that. Most businesses don't operate on that basis. If you're a corner grocer, you don't operate on that basis. If you're a small term, if you're making, bespoke furniture, you don't look at the day-by-day sales numbers and the quarter-by-quarter growth on growth. You say, what job am I doing? Am I keeping my customers happy? And we, in the bigger the business, the more formal the business, have become seduced by this continuous magnetism of growth, which I think is artificial.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Another silos, and we'll talk about it in different components here, but silos are cropping up everywhere. Taking the agency side for a moment, and again, interested in your view on this because you would have dealt with different agency partners. So marketing, as you said, it's relatively small industry, but yet I'm increasingly working on clients, and they could be quite small clients. No disrespect to them, but like we're not talking about enormous clients here. And at a meeting, you could have the media agency, a lead creative agency, a digital creative agency, a social agency, an activations agency, and a couple more thrown in for good measures.
Research agency.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the way it is. So I do understand that it's quite complicated sometimes, but I think you made a point in the book that, and I know this, if you have 7 different agencies, they're all doubling up on a little bit of work. You don't need 7 different strategies. You don't need a social strategy and a digital strategy and a media strategy and you may need a creative strategy separately, but you need one central strategy deployed in different channels. So what's your view on this, and why do you think so many clients are lured in by the idea of specialist agencies, particularly in a market our size? Why do you think it's taken so much?
Well, the easy answer is I have not a foggiest idea, because it makes little sense to me. It really does. I mean, I've worked with companies that have had their own social media departments. They didn't have an outdoor department or a TV department, or they might have had corporate affairs, which might be a bit specialist because you're looking at the actual nature of the business reporting cycles and governance issues. But most companies do not need to have a social media. By the way, I hate the word social media because it implies that everything else is anti-social media, because I find it bizarre. But I'm not sure. There is a sense that everything goes in cycles. And people will increasingly begin to go back towards a more consolidated approach. I certainly do think that there's something lost by having to go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting with all the different so-called experts, all in their own silos, all with their own cost structures. And there can be a little bit of unnecessary competition taking place if they're all in the one room. There is something not quite right. And I think there is a need to stand back. Notwithstanding that, most of the agencies that were researched in the for the book, in the research project I did for it, have a more grounded sense of what their importance is to the business than the businesses do themselves. So even if there is a rendering asunder of different parts of the agencies, the most obvious one is creative and media, then it's still interesting that agencies that have a more grounded view of, we're looking for revenue growth for the business. We're looking for this to actually work for the business. Whereas clients are more often than not, notwithstanding the fact that they say that they're very satisfied with the agency, they're more influenced by the worth of the communications campaign, right? Which I find at least troubling, if not actually just bizarre. So agencies, even if they are in different parts, they actually care more about the business of the business than the marketers themselves. That's a shock.
And that's great that you say that, because I certainly couldn't say that. I'd be killed if I said that, because it's of course the agency people. So that's what I say. It's great having clients on, because they can, and it's great because you get a different perspective. I only see it from my side of the table and working with the agencies, and the meetings are all fine. Everyone's polite and saying, no, it doesn't matter. No, we don't mind what budget is, but they're all fighting for the budget, kicking under the table, or having a little land grab. It can be quite fractious, but it's getting better. But certainly doubles up on client time, I think.
Research is also saying, Dave, that the standard of brief is poor and getting worse. So there's something going on. I think part of it is that an awful lot of the marketing brand teams, maybe not the senior marketers, but the brand teams, they're unsure of their ground. They're not quite confident enough to be able to say, we need to do nothing.
Yeah,
we stick on retainer, but just don't do anything for us. We're quite happy with what we're doing. They're not content about doing nothing, and they're not quite sure what they are doing. So there's a lot of unease in the whole thing, I think, particularly on the client side. And the marketing agencies, whether that be PR, media, creative, whatever, digital, they have a better view of what's good for the business. And what they want from the research is they want to spend more time with the client. They want to spend more time understanding the business and the business issues.
Yeah.
The client, when you ask them what are your biggest challenges, they want to know how to hire better people. It's very different in terms of, I want to do a better job for my company, you would have thought might come out.
Yeah.
It didn't even come out as being a major challenge.
Right, yeah. It seems that silo. And it's funny because it's something you mentioned there, which is hiring better people. Just on that, so another trend which I've seen, and you're right, things come in and out of in vogue and go out of popularity relatively quickly. So in-housing is another big thing that has been talked about. It hasn't quite happened to the degree that we have. But you mentioned clients taking social in-house, that kind of stuff. So it is. And my view on in-housing is that I think it's a big management consultancy fallacy here. I actually think, if you think about logic, you were in Glanbia, the headaches of the food industry, the problems that go with that industry. It has its own problems. So if I was in that industry, the last thing I'd want to do is the headaches of stepping into a mini agency and trying to run that, all the problems that go with that, keeping up with tech, hiring the right people, training the right people, benchmarking. Now, you might say, of course, Dave, you're going to say that you think in-housing is not the way to go, but I genuinely do. I we have a couple of clients that we're actively helping in-house certain things, and we do it. I do this with a smile on my face, because actually the bits they in-house tend to be the executional level campaign stuff, the stuff that really, it's low margin, it's huge. You employ loads of people, a very, very low margin for us. I'd much rather say to clients, yeah, fine, do it yourself. Call me, we'll come in, we'll give you a state of the nation, we'll help you with these things, we'll train your people, we'll give you consultancy, we'll help you. We'll do the high value stuff. You go off and book the campaigns, give yourself hourly reports, which the thing you talked about watching the stock market, people are obsessed with this in digital campaigns as well, just because you can look at it. And you can get completely waylaid with nonsense. So I'm actually a big fan of in-housing. I don't think it's going to last. And I think a lot of people, big companies globally, have made big noises about it, and then it has quietly gone away. You find, they're not doing that anymore. So they're quite big to jump on a PR machine saying we're in-housing this way forward, and then when it doesn't work, they say nothing about it. So I think help clients if they want to do it, and they'll probably come back to market in a few months.
But if you go back, and this sounds like a bit like a broken record, I guess. If you go back to what marketing is meant to be, if it is about making selling easier, what does bringing a particular part of the agency brief in-house, how does that make selling easier? If you can farm out your HR department, why would you farm in your executional piece on communications?
Yeah,
but it does go. There's I think it's the new MD of WPP has come out and said that increasingly heads of marketing are not CMOs, they're chief communications officers. They're spending all their time on that 1/5 piece I've talked about before. And if you want to be busy on that 1/5 piece in-house, that'll keep you busy. Bigger department, more overhead. Look at the number of people I have reporting to me. Look what I have to do. I need a new office block or whatever else it might be. It's not necessarily going to help selling easier and easier all the time. Would that person be better off, and would that resource or that overhead be better off not doing execution stuff around communications, but actually trying to work out how come the call center and the website are poorly designed? If you don't have a fundamental belief in what you're about, and the rest of the company don't know it as well, you may as well in-house. You may as well do whatever you want, because all you're trying to do is keep busy and to move on then within the average 4-year time frame that most senior company CMOs do in some of the leading companies in the world.
Yeah, totally agree. Oh, just on this before we move on, another book that you mentioned in your book, which I'd read. So that's why I said, oh, great, there's a book I've read. So Range, which is a great book. And I touch on this point about the idea of generalist versus specialist. Marketing is undoubtedly becoming, and I'm talking about on the agency side here, it is a big, huge mess of too many specialists in a relatively small industry. So how do you balance this? Because as the ecosystem becomes quite complicated, right? So even social, staying up to speed with social from an agency point of view is quite hard to change. They make new platforms, new ways to connect. So we do need a degree of specialism in a particular thing as the world and marketing landscape becomes more complicated. But how do you balance that, this specialist, generalist thing? What's your view on that in your experience?
If it's about making selling easier, you have to be a generalist. You cannot be a specialist. You may well require certain people to help you out on particular spots, particular areas, which are, very technical or very detailed, and you may not have a particular area of skill. But if you think about if making selling easier does apply, and I'm sorry for going on about this, Dave, but if it does apply, you need to have a strong sense of consumer behavior or customer behavior, whether it's business to business, product or service. You need to have a strong sense of how to build teams around you. And I don't mean teams as in reporting structures, but teams of people to help solve problems. Mm-hmm. So you need to be a leader. You need to be an observer of consumer behavior and customer behavior. You need to be good at P&L, the profit and loss account. You need to be very good at. You need to be a generalist. You cannot just say, "Sure, there you go. I'm now the best ever person at briefing an ad agency. I'm the best marketing person around." That doesn't work. I do remember when I went to Showrings. Showrings had, and even the name Showrings isn't much known at the moment. It renamed itself to Bulmers. But I remember when I went there, one of the questions put out by the group marketing director was, "You're coming from Johnson & Johnson. You've worked in John Players. John Players had just as I joined, had the new health regulations. There was no advertising allowed, except print, no radio, no in-store, nothing on, even in duty-free was allowed. Everything was stopped. So basically it was print only, in certain magazines and newspapers only. Not you couldn't do flyers, you could do it in wholesale and cash and carry, nowhere else. And I'd worked in Johnson & Johnson, but I'd worked on the medical care side of Johnson & Johnson, and I'd worked in UCD. And he said to me, "You've never made an ad. You've never been involved in a TV shoot." And I said, "Yeah, but my job isn't to make a TV ad. My job is to employ people who be really good at making TV ads to know what's right and what's wrong. And I only know what's right and what's wrong by actually working with the best and by knowing my consumers better." And that to me is, now, I got the job. I'm not sure that was the reason I got the job or not, but that was to me the only way of answering that question. I couldn't be the best TV ad producer ever sat in front of them for a job application. I had to be someone who actually knew what was right and what was wrong. So I'm not a lawyer. A huge amount of my time as a marketing person was developing contracts. Yeah. We developed a distribution contract for Miller in Ireland. We launched Miller Genuine Draft, the first country in the world it had been launched in. It became their export standard after we developed it for them. But we developed the distribution contract. We developed the sale and purchase agreement for Ballygown. Legal people were there, but I had to sit down and go, "Yeah, this makes sense." But I wasn't trained legally, but I knew what was right and what was wrong, and I'd done a lot of research to make sure I was capable of being able to, put up a good show at a table. So it is generalism. It can't be specialism. Otherwise, you're the best draftsman of a distribution contract in the marketing department.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
So what?
Again, it is something, you don't have to be an expert in any particular area, but you do have to have the broad. You have to have an interest, and you have to show some kind of capability or ability to go in and upskill in areas that at a quite a top line level that you may not know intuitively, which is and I think I think the danger is people think I'm great at this one thing and I'm not great at the other things, and I don't know, a lot of business book says double down on the things you're great at and don't worry about the things you're not great at, which
several people who are good at things that you're weak at.
Exactly. You talked about salesmanship quite a lot, and it is something that's funny. I think like we've done. It's funny when you think about, even again, I'm sorry to keep bringing it back to my industry, but say the media agency and the media the publisher industry, the media owners have great sales guys in terms of they'd see themselves in sales. A lot of the people who work in us would not see themselves in sales. It's just strange, because it's something that our chief executive Liam McDonald would say, everyone's in sales, right? And they no, we're not sales. And actually I see a lack of skill set, and it's not saying I'm great at it, everyone else isn't. I'm not particularly good at it. We just aren't very good at salesmanship, and you think salesmanship is really, really important. So how important do you think salesmanship is, not as a division or a function or a sales team, as a kind of an attitude, or even when you're hiring people in, that ability, how important and how in short supply is good salesmanship?
Well, it is core. I think it's core because salesmanship implies a huge amount more than, as you say, just the operational piece of selling. Anyone, anything, robotic selling exists. You can take an order, but building the relationship and understanding the needs and the wants is really, really important. And trying to find a way to connect with people is really important, whether that be selling an idea in the company or selling a product out in the market or a service out in the market, wherever that might be, internationally or domestically, is what it's about. And one thing I'm sort of conscious of is maybe on 2 occasions I can think of right now, just to answer your question, we worked with an agency who would have failed, and this is over my career now, who would, and these are big opportunities, who failed on the pitch, but won on the relationship. I remember going into one agency and saying, it didn't work. The idea you had, I know where you're going, I know what you were trying, and this wasn't a pitch. Now, this was them just putting up, and it wasn't a competitive pitch. It was them pitching an idea.
Yeah.
I said, it didn't work. And they went, well, what does that mean? I said, I'm not going to go forward with it. And they said, it's at the end of the relationship. I said, no. But you had someone in the room who I really want to work with, and there's a bottle of champagne for them. I want to work with them.
Yeah, okay.
Pass it on and tell them to keep up the good work. Because we just connected.
Yeah.
And you connect with trade, you connect with competitors, you connect with network out there. You're selling yourself, you're selling your business, you're selling your ideas internally and externally all the time. Selling a vision.
Yeah, it is, because there is a big difference between the art of salesmanship and working in selling. And I think people, when you ask a question like, no, I'm not in sales, I'm definitely not in sales, but there's a degree of salesmanship in anything. And you're right, even selling something in, pitching something that we're passionate about. From my side of the fence, I think it's something that it's in relatively short supply. Before we get into just talk, I'm conscious I've kept you a long time, but I'm just enjoying it. When I'm enjoying them, I just get carried away, and it feels like a nice chat. So, and I really enjoyed reading the book, and I'm learning a lot. So it's good. Another thing, and not that I keep saying this struck me, but in the book, I really like this, that you made an interesting point, which is hold on to your first impressions or kind of keep them, and because they're invariably right, or they're valuable at some point down the line. So don't forget first impressions. Malcolm Gladwell has a whole book about that, Blink, which is pretty much all about that. So I don't know, I've debated this with people, and Malcolm Gladwell's, his examples or his hypothesis and some of the tests that he's done could be argued that no, they're set up to give the result that he wants. But the idea is quite interesting, because this idea of gut feel, intuition, you think that's really, really important, don't you, in business and in marketing?
Yeah, because in a weird way, you always should be an outsider. You can't ignore that the person you're selling to, the ultimate sale, the revenue, rather than just the ideas or the vision of one big number within a company. But the ultimate idea of what you're selling is to someone external to you. It's in FMCG, you're trying to sell through the trade to a consumer. In many cases, you're trying to sell through the trade to a purchaser who then passes it on to a consumer. So in many cases, you're buying something for someone else who's going to eat it at home. Yeah. Not everyone, buys for themselves. They buy for other people in the family, or they buy for other purposes. So it is external, and you have to adopt the eyes of a learner all the time. And your first impressions are going to be, I think, your truest impressions. I remember writing down, I actually came across it recently, my first impressions when I went into John Player's. And some of them were to do with just the type of building we were in, the type of people who were there, the offices, some to do with the product, some to do with pricing, the reporting structures, didn't understand this, don't know why they do that. And if I looked at them now, I remember clearly what I was meaning at the time, and most of them would still be valid, or certainly would you could hold a mirror up against the company, against these ideas, even now, even though they don't have a factory in Ireland anymore. There was a very good lesson I learned when Jerry Grogan, who was my boss, he was managing director in John Player's. We had this big bit of research, very seminal bit of research done. And the new tobacco health regulations were in about a year at this stage. And we decided we just need to stand back. What's going on? What are the consumers saying? There were new warnings in all the packs, some quite dire ones, new regulations about what we could do with pricing, et cetera, et cetera. Got this big piece of research done in the boardroom. We all stood up, finished our cups of coffee, thanked the agency. Jerry was there, I was there, head of finance was invited, and so on. Big group of people, and it was very, very, very good bit of research. And we all shook hands. I brought the agency down to the research agency down to the front door, said our goodbyes, walked back up and sat down. And as I sat down, Jerry walked in and said, "What are your ideas? What's your first impression?" And I went, well, it's bang, bang, bang. He said, "Write it down. They're the right ones."
Right.
And I said, what do you mean by that? Why do you do that? He said, because it's so easy just to get brought into the day job when you
Yeah.
walk back into your office. And suddenly it's kind of, I'm not quite sure about that. And I wondered, did he really mean that? Your first ideas are probably your truest ideas. The other expression is your worst day is your truest day. Your first impressions are your probably the ones that actually are going to be most relevant, because you've got someone external to the business, a research agency, to tell you what was going on. Why would you ignore that? And why would you try and dilute or distort or sweep it away? So I do believe that your first impressions. But if you think of it, even just Dave, your first impressions of a product when you pick it up as a consumer.
Yeah, it's hard to get past it sometimes. Yeah,
and it could be it doesn't taste right, doesn't look right. It's too clunky, it's too heavy, it's the wrong color. They're your first impressions, and you can overcome them, but you have to have reasons. You have to challenge as to why you would overcome them. And I think that the first impressions, I think it's a really, really valuable thing for people to actually to try and rehearse in their minds. It's hard to do if you're in the company for a while. You can still do it though. To stand back a bit. Imagine you've walked into this business for the first time. What's the reception like?
Yeah.
What's the state of the office like? What's the welcome like? If you're in the food business and your canteen is a pigsty, that's not great. All these things matter, and they do stand the test of time. And whether you're in the business, a couple of hours or a couple of years, they still can be questions worth asking of yourself.
That's great advice.
By the way, what's a very good idea is when someone new comes into the business, ask them to write them down and ask them to brief about them.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. And yeah, good and bad. I think people don't like saying, we give first impression. If you're put in the spot, you kind of don't want to say too many negative things potentially, or we're just nice people. So sometimes we don't like saying that. We just go, we kind of tone them down a little bit. But no, it's really good advice.
That goes to the culture of the company. I mean, if you sat down with a new hire and said, listen, in a month's time, can you come back to me and give me your first impressions? And I don't mind. Tell me what you think. The way we behave, whatever it is, just you tell me. If the culture of the company is that you upbraid that person because they gave you bad news only, well then shame on the company.
Yeah, but you're putting a lot of trust in that new employee to realize that he's not going to fire me if I tell him something he doesn't want to hear. So it's hard to do if you don't know people. But anyway, no, I totally agree with that. The book we've talked quite a lot about. Because it's easy to talk about the problems, right? We can do that about anything. It's easy. I do it all the time myself. I tend to focus on giving out about things. But it all makes for rather depressing, gloomy reading. It's in trouble. Marketing is in trouble, and we've talked a lot about why it is. But I've decided enough doom and gloom. Just generally in life, 2021 is about, stop just surviving, start thriving, try and make the best of whatever it is. So on that note, what can we do? Is there hope? Is there hope for marketing? Do you see it being even in the medium term?
So 1982 was when shareholder value became the bright shiny light on the hill, and everyone followed that light and took it on board. What's increasingly coming out is the Business Roundtable in America, which represents all of the leading businesses in America, both in terms of tech and banking and large FMCG and so on and so on. They've come out and said, we have to actually move away from shareholder value. That can't be all and end all. And they've brought increasingly you see things, and Diageo have done it in the UK, Unilever are doing it, which is around what's known as ESG, which is environmental, societal, and governance.
Okay.
And I think that is a bit of a chink of light, that people are moving away from this ruthless focus on growing to, hang on a second, is this good for the economy? Is this good for society? Are we doing the right thing in terms of our business? Are we behaving right? Now, I think there's more emphasis around environmental and social than there is around governance so far, but I think that the three things being talked about openly by the Business Roundtable is a really, really good development. There's even over the weekend, the Financial Times, the head of Financial Times said that there's a significant, I think he mentioned threefold increase in the growth rate for brands that have an environmental and societal purpose than ones that don't. So consumers are actually, in a way, pushing companies to behave in a different way. So I do think that there are signs of hope. I do think that one of the, it's hard to say benefits of COVID and benefits of pandemic, one of the outcomes in a positive way will be, I think people are going to be looking for what's the real worth of this? What's the sense of community around things? I think is going to become more important. So, and you know, it isn't all about price. It isn't all about spending. I think there is going to be I think there is increasing signs of people becoming less focused on growth for growth's sake, because in some ways that got us to where we are with the pandemic. You know, you travel anywhere, buy anything, go anywhere, do what you want anywhere, including taking over jungles and rainforests and previously uninhabited areas. Well, that didn't work. Now, what are we going to do now? So I do think there are signs of hope, and I think there's I think it's some really good examples. For instance, is Louis Copeland. Louis Copeland is, you know, around for many, many years. His business is shut for most of last year, shut at the moment. And yes, his online activities is really, really not repetitive. Sounds like a negative word, but it's there. It's coming. He gives you new, and if you buy something off him, well, I tell you, bar coming out and giving you a hug. You get phone calls to sure the order is okay, has it arrived, does the size work for you, Colin? A thank you note, a personalised thank you note comes from where Dave or Colin or whoever it might be, who's actually packed it for you. It's now, not everyone's going to be buying Louis Copeland, but there's more evidence of that beginning to happen. People becoming more engaged with their customers. That's one of the reasons why I named my consulting company Engage Consulting, because I think an awful lot of it is about people finding connections and rooting those connections and working on them hard. And that's coming through more and more as we go into, hopefully, a more a different post-pandemic world.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the way we're talking about is like marketing, and not just marketing, business needs to have more empathy. I don't mean that in a kind of huggy, giving everyone a big hug type of way, but it just means understanding consumers. You can tell Louis when you're talking to him, I think he probably needs an agency. Ask him to give me a shout, tell him I'll do really good. I'll send him a personal thank you note after he does a campaign with us. So on that, and we're nearly out of time, but I just want to touch on something. You've had a glittering and distinguished career in marketing and business, and now you're a published author, but you mentioned your consult business there. So tell me just briefly about that. What are you doing? What's the plan? Are you busy? And what do you do? What type of things? Because there's a lot of consultancies around. So if anyone's listening saying, what could Colin Gordon do for me? If anyone's listening, what's the pitch?
Engage Consulting is it's advisory, it's mentoring, it's coaching, it's working with people who I want to work with. And in many cases, it is a mixture of mentoring and coaching. It's not, I don't have international networks of people all around the world like McKinsey's, and nor do I want to. I want to work with people who have particular issues. It could be moving from generation to generation within a business. It could be around it could be about trying to develop brands that they've never done it before. They've just been in private label or contract manufacturing. It could be around a new business idea, but they're not quite sure who to connect with at government level or agency level or whatever. So my role is to try and act as someone who can engage with the company. That's where the name comes from, and help them engage with some of the problems and solutions. It's, am I busy? I'm doing exactly what I want to do. My wife would say, what was this stopping working on a full-time basis? That didn't work.
Yeah.
But I also do some work which I've done for a number of years. I'm on the board of Concern. I'm on the foundation board in the RDS, and I do some other pro bono work, which I enjoy as well. And that really does ground me. So I'm kept as busy as I want to. I'm doing what I want to, and I had time, and I wanted to write the book, and I had time to be able to go and do that.
Yeah, and on the book, as I said it at the start, and I said it all the way through, I'd urge people to pick up a copy of it and read it, because it's a great read. So if anyone's interested in getting in touch, well, where can they get the book, first of all? And then if they want to get in touch with you, where's the best place to find you? Do you have a website?
Yeah, probably the best place right now. I mean, I have a website, which is Engage Consulting 121, but it's the best place is LinkedIn. I can pick up messages. I'm becoming a significant fan of LinkedIn, and I can then direct them to myself directly, and we can talk off the LinkedIn profile and platform. I'm also the book is available through Orpen, ORPEN, Orpen.com, and they've been very good and very helpful in developing the whole product. At the end of the day, if there are any issues in getting hold of it, just look me up on LinkedIn. I'll sort it out for them straight away. And do say at the start of the book, I'm interested in people actually giving feedback. So I got feedback this morning from a guy who I've worked with in the past around the book and around some of the ideas, who's based in Melbourne, and he's asked for copies of the book to be sent out to him. So I sent him out some half a dozen copies of the books for his direct network out there, with some Tato crisps, Cadbury's, and Barry's tea.
Nice.
So Ireland all over.
Nice, very good.
And hopefully he'll. But he likes the ideas. He's trying to push them out in that part of the world. There is a general sense about a lot of people who have stepped out of day-to-day marketing, which is when you stop on the hurly-burly of life. Do you know what? Marketing needs to stand back and look at itself, and including Mike out in Melbourne, a good Kiwi, but also a very good marketer and a very good marketing advisor. And there's a growing bunch of people who are trying to say, how can we actually just maybe slow this up a little bit and look at what is the real reason and purpose of marketing? And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking to engage with people who actually are prepared to have that conversation.
Okay, well, that is it. Thanks for joining me today, and thanks for writing the article. And but particularly thanks for just making the time. So I really enjoyed the chat. And sorry for keeping you longer than I promised. But yeah, that's partly your fault though, because it takes two to run over time. So anyway, thanks, and thanks to our partners in the Irish Times Media Solutions, and thanks to Andrea on sound. Until 2 weeks' time, bye-bye. Stay safe.
The Inside Marketing Podcast, brought to you by Dentsu and Irish Times Media Solutions.